Penelope Mitchell clutched her worn music satchel as the coastal steamer groaned through the gray Maine waters. Her 7-year-old son Oliver pressed against the salt-stained window beside her. The autumn of 1889 had stripped her of everything, her teaching position when the scandal of unwed motherhood finally caught up with her, their small Boston apartment when the rent became impossible. She watched the lighthouse grow larger on the rocky promontory, its white tower stark against storm clouds that seemed to mirror the uncertainty in her chest. Jonas Whitmore's letters had been brief but kind, promising a home for both her and Oliver in exchange for companionship and care. The distance between them felt both terrifying and merciful. No one here would know her shame, her failures, her desperate need for sanctuary. Oliver traced patterns in the window's condensation, his small fingers creating ships and birds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. "Will the lighthouse keeper like my drawings, Mama?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the engine's rhythm. Penelope smoothed his dark hair, so like her own, and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. "I'm sure he will, darling. Mr. Whitmore wrote that he enjoys art and music." She had memorized every word of their brief correspondence, searching for clues about the man who would become her husband within the week. The letters spoke of loneliness, of duty, of a keeper's life that demanded sacrifice, but they held warmth, too, and genuine interest in Oliver's welfare. The fishing vessel Mary Catherine waited at the small dock, its weathered captain Tobias Reed extending a calloused hand to help them aboard. "Mrs. Mitchell, I presume. Jonas sent me to fetch you and the boy." His blue eyes held concern as he loaded their modest belongings into the boat. "Fine day for crossing. Though the keeper, well, he's been through some trials lately." The old fisherman's words carried weight, but Penelope pushed away the flutter of unease. She had come too far, risked too much, to turn back now. The lighthouse beam swept across the water as they approached, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, promising guidance through whatever storms lay ahead. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The heavy door of the lighthouse quarters swung open to reveal not the tired but stable man she had expected, but someone whose eyes held the wild intensity of storm-tossed seas. Jonas Whitmore stood in the doorway, his dark hair unkempt, his keeper's uniform stained and wrinkled, speaking earnestly to empty air. "Tell Captain Morrison I've checked the lights 3 times. The rocks are clearly marked." His voice cracked with desperate authority before his gaze fell upon Penelope and Oliver. The transformation was immediate and heartbreaking. Confusion flooded his features, as if seeing them required tremendous effort to understand. You're real," he whispered, reaching toward Penelope's face with trembling fingers. "Not like the others who come asking why I couldn't save them." Tobias Reed stepped between them, his voice gentle but firm. "Jonas, this is Penelope Mitchell and her boy Oliver. Your bride, remember. You've been expecting them." The lighthouse keeper's hand dropped to his side, and for a moment his eyes cleared with something approaching sanity. "Penelope," he repeated, slowly, as if testing the name's reality against his fractured thoughts. "I wrote letters. I remember letters." But then his attention fractured again, turning toward the spiral staircase that led to the light room. "They're calling again, 27 souls, asking why the light wasn't bright enough, why I couldn't guide them home." Oliver pressed closer to his mother's skirts, and Penelope felt her carefully constructed hopes crumble like sandcastles before an inevitable tide. Dr. Cornelius Hale arrived before sunset, summoned by Tobias's urgent message, his medical bag heavy with laudanum and restraints. "I've warned the town council repeatedly that Jonas should be committed to the asylum in Augusta," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of education and respectability. "This delusion has worsened since the Sarah Elizabeth wreck 3 months ago. He believes the dead sailors visit him nightly." The doctor's cold assessment of Jonas as a hopeless case ignited something fierce in Penelope's chest. She watched the lighthouse keeper through the window, seeing not madness, but profound grief, wearing the mask of insanity. "Doctor, perhaps there are other approaches to healing beyond confinement and sedation," she said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. "I've studied music therapy in Boston. Sometimes the mind needs gentleness, not force, to find its way back to truth." That first night, Penelope lay awake in the small keeper's quarters bedroom, while Jonas paced the light room above, his boots marking steady circles as he maintained the beacon. Through the floorboards, she could hear his conversations with ghost space, explanations of wind patterns and tide tables, desperate apologies for maritime disasters beyond any mortal's control. Oliver slept fitfully beside her, occasionally murmuring about the strange man who talked to invisible friends. When the lighthouse beam swept across their window every 30 seconds, it illuminated her resolve, crystallizing like ice. She would not abandon this broken man to the asylum's cold mercy. Whatever had shattered his mind deserved more than medical pronouncements and chemical restraints. The next morning, Dr. Hale arrived with commitment papers and 2 burly attendants from the county. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've seen his condition. No rational woman would subject herself and her child to such instability." Jonas cowered in the corner of the main room, his eyes darting between the visitors and spaces where others saw only air. "The dead ones warned me you'd come," he whispered, addressing the doctor with desperate clarity. "They said living people would try to take me away from my duty." Penelope stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Dr. Hale, as Jonas's legal fiancé, I formally object to this commitment. We will marry today, and I will assume responsibility for his care." The declaration surprised everyone, including herself, but she saw hope flicker in Jonas's confused gaze, the first truly human expression she had witnessed since arriving. Tobias Reed performed the brief ceremony that afternoon, his fit hands surprisingly gentle as he guided them through improvised vows. Jonas spoke his words with touching sincerity, though he occasionally glanced over Penelope's shoulder as if seeking approval from unseen witnesses. "I promise to protect you and the boy from storms," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had failed at protection before. Penelope's own vows were simple but fierce. "I promise to stand with you through whatever darkness comes." Oliver watched wide-eyed as his mother became wife to this strange, damaged man, not understanding the legal protection her marriage would provide against doctors and county officials. The lighthouse beam marked time above them, steady and unwavering, despite the chaos below. Dr. Hale departed in frustration, but not before warning Penelope that she had doomed herself and her child to isolation with a dangerous madman. "When he harms you and he will, don't expect the community's sympathy. You've made your choice." His words stung because they voiced her own fears, but watching Jonas carefully prepare Oliver's small bed in the storage room, she saw tenderness beneath the confusion. The lighthouse keeper had insisted the boy sleep near the stairs to the light room. "The beacon's rhythm helps children sleep," he explained to the air beside him, then looked at Oliver with surprising focus. "Your mother's music will help too. The dead ones told me she plays beautifully." It was the first indication that his delusions might somehow carry threads of truth. That evening, Penelope unpacked her small piano in the lighthouse's main room, the same instrument that had supported them through years of teaching Boston's wealthy children. Jonas watched from the doorway as she positioned it near the window overlooking the sea, his expressions cycling between confusion and something approaching wonder. "Music?" he asked, as if the concept required translation from a forgotten language. Oliver immediately climbed onto the bench beside his mother, his small fingers finding familiar melodies they had practiced together. The sound filled the circular room with warmth, and for the first time since arriving, Penelope saw Jonas's shoulders relax. "Beautiful," he whispered, though whether to her or his invisible companions remained unclear. They'd been so quiet since the music began. The lighthouse became their world within the world, a place where reality bent around Jonas's fractured perceptions while somehow maintaining its own internal logic. Penelope established routines that accommodated his conversations with the dead while gently anchoring him to the living present. Meals were served for 5 people, though only 3 sat at the table. Because Jonas insisted the drowned sailors needed sustenance, Oliver adapted with the resilience of childhood, sometimes addressing the empty spaces his stepfather spoke to with polite curiosity. The keeper's duties continued with mechanical precision, climbing the 73 steps to trim the oil lamps, wick, checking the lens assemblies, recording weather observations in the official log. During these tasks, his madness retreated enough for glimpses of the competent, caring man he had been before. Tragedy fractured his ability to distinguish between memory and present reality. Winter settled over the lighthouse, like a familiar adversary, bringing storms that tested both the beacon's strengths and the fragile family taking shelter beneath it. Penelope developed a rhythm of care that honored Jonas's delusions while subtly introducing elements of reality. When he spoke to Captain Morrison about proper navigation, she would ask gentle questions. What did the captain say about tomorrow's weather? Gradually, she began to distinguish patterns in his conversations. The dead sailors, appeared most vividly during storms or when ships passed in the distance. Understanding this gave her hope that his mind followed rules, even broken ones, and rules could potentially be healed through patience and love. Oliver proved surprisingly adept at navigating his stepfather's fractured world, treating the invisible sailors with the same matter-of-fact acceptance he showed to the Lighthouse's daily routines. "Mr. Morrison likes when I draw ships," he told his mother one afternoon, holding up a sketch of a three-masted schooner. Jonas had been watching the boy work, occasionally offering corrections about sail configuration or hull design. "The dead ones remember everything about their vessels," Jonas explained to Penelope with touching pride. "Oliver draws them exactly as they were." These moments of connection, however strange, formed the foundation of their unconventional family bond. The boy's innocent acceptance seemed to calm Jonas's more agitated episodes. Tobias Reed became their lifeline to the outside world, arriving monthly with supplies and news from the mainland. He treated Jonas's condition with weathered pragmatism, neither dismissing the delusions nor indulging them completely. "How are the conversations this week?" he would ask, as casually as inquiring about the weather. The old fisherman possessed an intuitive understanding of grief's many disguises. Having lost his own son to the sea decades earlier, he brought not just flour and coffee, but books on lighthouse maintenance, sheet music for Penelope's piano, and art supplies for Oliver. Most importantly, he brought the quiet dignity of acceptance, showing the small family that love could flourish even in the most unconventional circumstances. The piano became Penelope's most powerful tool for reaching the rational corners of Jonas's mind. She discovered that certain melodies could draw his attention away from the ghostly conversations, particularly gentle pieces in minor keys that seemed to match his internal emotional landscape. BAFTA's slower movements worked especially well, their mathematical precision perhaps, appealing to the methodical mind that still maintained the lighthouse's complex mechanisms. During these musical interludes, Jonas would sometimes speak directly to her about practical matters, needed repairs, supply shortages, observations about weather patterns. These moments of clarity lengthened gradually. Like a tide slowly changing direction, Dr. Hale made periodic visits, ostensibly to check on community health but clearly monitoring the situation at the lighthouse. He would question Penelope about any violent episodes, document Jonas's behavior in his official reports, and warn repeatedly about the dangers of living with an unstable man. "You're enabling his madness by accommodating it," he insisted during one particularly tense visit. "Proper medical treatment requires confronting delusions, not nurturing them." But Penelope had begun to see her husband's conversations with the dead not as pure insanity, but as a profound form of mourning that his mind couldn't process normally. The sailors' deaths weren't delusions, they had happened, and Jonas carried their memory in the only way his shattered psyche could manage. One stormy February night, Penelope woke to find Jonas standing at the main room's window, tears streaming down his face as he spoke to the darkness beyond the glass. "I know you can't forgive me, Captain Morrison, 27 souls, and I couldn't save a single one." His anguish was so raw, so completely human, that her own heart broke in recognition. She approached him slowly, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "Jonas, tell me about that night. Help me understand." For the first time since her arrival, he looked at her with complete recognition, his eyes clear and present. "The storm came from nowhere, Penelope. Their light was dying, and I couldn't make the beam bright enough. I watched them break apart on the rocks, heard them calling for help I couldn't give." In that moment, she understood that healing him meant honoring the reality of his grief, not dismissing it as mere madness. But Penelope began researching the Sarah Elizabeth disaster, asking Tobias to bring newspapers and official reports from the mainland. The tragedy had indeed occurred exactly as Jonas described: a merchant vessel caught in an unexpected squall, driven onto the rocky shoals despite the lighthouse's warning beam. 27 lives lost, including women and children traveling to new homes in Boston. The investigation had cleared Jonas of any negligence, but she understood that official exoneration meant nothing to a man who had watched people die while feeling powerless to save them. His conversations with the dead weren't symptoms of insanity, but manifestations of survivor's guilt so profound that his mind had created an elaborate framework to continue serving those he couldn't rescue in life. Armed with this understanding, Penelope began engaging more directly with Jonas's ghostly conversations, asking questions that bridged his internal world with external reality. What would Captain Morrison want us to do to prevent future wrecks? She might ask during his evening talks with the invisible sailors. This approach yielded surprising results. Jonas began discussing practical improvements to the lighthouse's warning systems, describing modifications that demonstrated his thorough understanding of maritime navigation and weather patterns. His madness, she realized, was actually a form of extreme dedication to duty, his fractured mind continuing to serve mariners in the only way it could conceive. The man beneath the madness possessed valuable knowledge about coastal safety. Oliver's artistic talents proved unexpectedly crucial to the healing process. The boy began drawing detailed portraits based on Jonas's descriptions of the drowned sailors, creating faces and forms for the invisible presences that haunted his stepfather. Captain Morrison has kind eyes, Oliver would say while sketching, somehow capturing expressions that Jonas recognized with startling accuracy. These drawings seemed to provide Jonas with a bridge between his internal visions and external reality, proof that others could see and honor the dead sailors without sharing his complete break from the present. The artwork became a language all three family members could share, making the invisible companions less isolating for Jonas. Spring's arrival brought increased maritime traffic and with it, more intense episodes of Jonas's ghostly conversations. Ships passing the lighthouse triggered elaborate discussions with his invisible companions about proper navigation channels and weather warnings. Penelope observed that his technical knowledge remained completely accurate even during his most disconnected moments. He could predict tide changes, identify vessel types by their silhouettes, and assess storm patterns with remarkable precision. This competence, preserved despite his mental fracture, suggested that healing might be possible if she could help him separate his valuable professional knowledge from the guilt-driven delusions that imprisoned his mind in the past. Tobias brought disturbing news during his April supply run. Maritime authorities were questioning Jonas's continued fitness for lighthouse duty. Dr. Hale's been filing reports about his condition. There's talk of bringing in a replacement keeper, maybe forcing Jonas into the asylum. After all, the threat was real and immediate. Losing the lighthouse, the position would mean losing their home, and Jonas's connection to the duty that gave his fractured existence meaning. Penelope felt panic rise in her chest as she realized how precarious their situation remained. The small family had found stability within their unusual circumstances, but the outside world still viewed Jonas as a dangerous madman rather than a grieving hero carrying an impossible burden of responsibility for others' deaths. The first real test of their family unity came when a merchant ship's distress signals appeared during a late spring storm. Jonas became frantically agitated, his conversations with the dead sailors reaching fever pitch as he climbed repeatedly to the light room to ensure maximum visibility. "They're saying it's happening again," he cried to Penelope, his eyes wild with terror. The Sarah Elizabeth all over again. She realized this was the moment that would either destroy him completely or provide the breakthrough needed for healing. If they could successfully guide the endangered vessel to safety, perhaps Jonas could begin to separate past tragedy from present capability. She sent Oliver to help Tobias prepare emergency rescue equipment while she climbed to support Jonas through what might be his redemptive trial. Dr. Hale arrived at the lighthouse the next morning with commitment papers and county officials, having been summoned by reports of Jonas's behavior during the storm. "His delusions have clearly worsened to dangerous levels," the doctor declared, pointing to witnesses who described the lighthouse keeper's frantic activities and apparent conversations with invisible companions. The merchant ship had indeed been guided safely to harbor, but Jonas's methods, constant checking of the beacon, elaborate discussions with empty air, and what appeared to be supernatural knowledge of wind patterns had convinced observers that his madness was escalating. Penelope found herself facing the real possibility of losing Jonas to institutional confinement just as she was beginning to understand the method within his apparent madness. The commitment hearing was scheduled for the following week. Desperate to prove Jonas's competence before the hearing, Penelope convinced Tobias to bring Captain Samuel Brooks, the commander of the merchant vessel they had helped guide to safety. The weathered mariner listened skeptically to her explanation of Jonas's condition, but his attitude changed dramatically when he met the lighthouse keeper face to face. "That man saved my ship and crew," Brooks declared after a long conversation about navigation and weather patterns. "His knowledge of these waters is extraordinary, and his dedication absolute. I don't care if he talks to Napoleon Bonaparte, the finest lighthouse keeper on the Maine coast. The captain's testimony provided the external validation Penelope desperately needed, proving that Jonas's professional competence remained intact despite his personal struggles with grief and trauma. Oliver's drawings of the drowned sailors became unexpected evidence in Jonas's favor when Captain Brooks recognized several of the sketched faces from newspaper accounts of the Sarah Elizabeth disaster. "These are accurate portraits," he said with wonder, studying the boys' careful artwork. "I sailed with some of these men on other voyages." This revelation suggested that Jonas's descriptions of the dead sailors contained real, specific information. Rather than generic hallucinations, his mind had somehow preserved detailed memories of the victims, keeping their identities alive when their bodies had been lost to the sea. The drawings proved that his conversations, however strange, were grounded in factual knowledge and genuine human connection rather than pure delusion. Penelope made a crucial discovery while organizing Jonas's personal papers, a detailed journal documenting every ship that had passed the lighthouse since his appointment, including comprehensive notes about weather conditions, navigational hazards, and safety improvements that could prevent future disasters. The journal revealed a brilliant, methodical mind obsessed with maritime safety. Every conversation with the dead sailors had actually been Jonas working through practical solutions to coastal navigation problems. His apparent madness was revealed as an extreme form of professional dedication. His fractured psyche channeling grief into an elaborate but effective system for preventing future tragedies. The journal provided concrete evidence that Jonas's condition, while unusual, served a genuine protective purpose. Dr. Hale's medical examination took an unexpected turn when Penelope presented the journal and Oliver's drawings as evidence of Jonas's continued competence. "These materials suggest a highly organized, technically proficient mind," she argued, challenging the doctor's assumptions about madness and functionality. "Perhaps we need to reconsider what constitutes mental health in someone who has experienced profound trauma while maintaining crucial responsibilities." The doctor found himself forced to acknowledge that Jonas's performance of lighthouse duties had been flawless throughout his apparent breakdown. No ships had been lost, no safety protocols ignored, no technical errors recorded. The evidence suggested that his unusual coping mechanisms were actually highly effective, if unconventional. The breakthrough came when Jonas himself joined the discussion, speaking directly to Dr. Hale about his condition, with startling clarity. "Doctor, I know you think I'm mad, and perhaps by conventional standards, I am. But the dead sailors aren't delusions. They're my responsibility made manifest. Every safety improvement I implement, every storm warning I provide, honors their memory and prevents others from sharing their fate." His explanation was lucid, thoughtful, and completely rational, despite acknowledging the reality of his ghostly conversations. Penelope realized that Jonas had always understood the nature of his condition, but had found it more bearable to serve the dead than to face the emptiness of survivor's guilt. Dr. Hale, confronted with evidence of competence rather than dangerous insanity, began to reconsider his rigid assumptions about mental illness and healing. The commitment hearing became a public examination of Jonas's fitness for duty, with the entire lighthouse community to bias, Captain Brooks, several rescued mariners, and even some skeptical county officials gathering to assess his case. Dr. Hale presented his medical arguments for institutional treatment, while Penelope defended her husband's right to continue serving despite his unconventional methods. Jonas sat quietly throughout most of the proceedings, occasionally glancing at empty spaces but maintaining remarkable composure. When asked to speak in his own defense, he rose with dignity that surprised everyone present. "Gentlemen, I have never failed in my duty to protect mariners from these dangerous waters. If my methods seem strange, judge me by my results, not my conversations with those who depend on my vigilance." The turning point came when Oliver, with 7-year-old innocence, addressed the assembled officials directly. "My Papa Jonas talks to the sailors who got lost in the storm because he loves them and doesn't want other sailors to get lost too. He's the kindest man I know, and he teaches me about stars and tides and how to help people." The child's simple testimony cut through the legal and medical complexities, revealing the essential humanity that Jonas had preserved despite his trauma. His devotion to duty, his gentleness with a vulnerable child, his commitment to preventing future tragedies, these qualities shone clearly through the boy's honest words, challenging the adults to see beyond surface symptoms to deeper truths about love, loss, and healing. Jonas himself provided the most compelling evidence of his transformation when he addressed his invisible companions directly during the hearing. Captain Morrison, First Mate Sullivan, all 27 souls, I hear your voices and honor your sacrifice, but these living people need to understand our work. He then turned to the officials and spoke with complete lucidity about every safety improvement he had implemented, every ship he had guided safely through dangerous waters, every storm he had monitored to protect coastal traffic. His ability to bridge between his internal world and external reality demonstrated not madness, but a unique form of healing that allowed him to function effectively while carrying an extraordinary emotional burden. The officials found themselves facing a man who was clearly different but undeniably competent. The committee's verdict was unanimous. Jonas would retain his position as lighthouse keeper, with the provision that Penelope would serve as his official assistant, helping to document and communicate his safety recommendations to maritime authorities. Dr. Hale, his rigid assumptions shaken by evidence of Jonas's continued competence, agreed to withdraw the commitment proceedings. Perhaps, he admitted reluctantly, there are forms of healing that don't require conventional sanity. Jonas wept openly when the decision was announced, his tears acknowledging both his profound gratitude and his recognition that he could continue serving those who depended on his vigilance. Penelope realized that their strange family had not only survived but had helped redefine what it meant to live with trauma, loss, and the responsibility to protect others from similar suffering. Summer brought a project that would test the full extent of Jonas's healing and the family's ability to transform trauma into purpose. Captain Brooks approached them with a proposal to establish a maritime rescue training center at the Lighthouse, using Jonas's detailed knowledge of coastal hazards to teach safety protocols to ship crews. Your husband's insights could save hundreds of lives, Brooks explained to Penelope, but only if he's willing to share them with living sailors as well as dead ones. The proposal represented Jonas's ultimate challenge, using his hard-won expertise to actively prevent tragedies rather than simply mourning past losses. It would require him to step fully back into the world of the living while maintaining his commitment to honoring the dead. The training center's first session arrived with a group of 12 merchant mariners, men whose skepticism about learning from a mad lighthouse keeper was evident in their wary expressions. Jonas stood before them in the lighthouse's main room. Oliver's drawings of the drowned sailors displayed around the walls, like silent witnesses. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I want to tell you about 27 sailors who died because the safety knowledge you're about to learn wasn't available to them." His approach was revolutionary, the specific details of past tragedies to teach prevention, honoring the dead by protecting the living. The sailors' skepticism melted as Jonas demonstrated his comprehensive understanding of coastal navigation, weather patterns, and emergency procedures. Oliver played an unexpected role in the training sessions, his artistic documentation of the lighthouse's safety improvements, providing visual aids that made Jonas's technical knowledge accessible to practical mariners. The boy had grown into his role as bridge between his stepfather's internal world and external reality, translating complex concepts into simple drawings and diagrams. "My Papa Jonas says the dead sailors are happy when living sailors learn to be safer," Oliver explained to one group, his innocent words carrying more weight than any medical explanation of his stepfather's condition. The child's acceptance and understanding had become a model for the adult community's growing recognition that healing could take many forms. Penelope's music became an integral part of the training program, her piano providing a rhythm for emergency drills and a calming influence during discussions of maritime disasters. She had learned to read Jonas's moods through his interactions with the invisible sailors, knowing when to intervene with gentle melodies that could anchor him to the present moment. The music served as therapy for both Jonas and the visiting mariners, many of whom carried their own experiences of loss and near disaster at sea. Her presence provided the emotional safety that allowed Jonas to share his painful knowledge, while maintaining his psychological balance. Together, they had created a unique approach to trauma recovery that honored the past while serving the future. The ultimate test came when a severe autumn storm threatened multiple vessels simultaneously, requiring Jonas to coordinate rescue operations while managing the most intense, ghostly conversations since Penelope's arrival. Standing in the light room with both living officials and his invisible companions, Jonas demonstrated the full integration of his healing. He could acknowledge the dead sailors' concerns while directing the world, rescue operations with remarkable precision. Captain Morrison agrees that the merchant vessel should shelter in Bramble Cove. He reported to the harbor master, his otherworldly consultations providing practically sound advice that saved lives. Penelope watched from below as her husband fully embraced his role as guardian of both the living and the dead. His madness transformed into a unique form of wisdom that served the maritime community more effectively than conventional sanity ever could have. The Lighthouse Rescue Training Center became a recognized institution within 2 years, with mariners traveling from distant ports to learn Jonas's comprehensive approach to coastal safety. Dr. Hale, his medical prejudices challenged and reformed by the evidence of Jonas's success, began documenting their unconventional therapy methods for publication in psychiatric journals. Perhaps, he wrote, we must expand our definitions of mental health to include forms of healing that incorporate trauma rather than simply trying to eliminate it. Jonas continued his conversations with the drowned sailors, but these interactions had evolved from desperate apologies into collaborative consultations about maritime safety. The dead had become partners in his mission to protect the living. Oliver, now 10 years old, had grown into a confident young artist whose drawings documented both the lighthouse's daily operations and the invisible world his stepfather inhabited. His sketches appeared in maritime safety publications, providing visual guides to coastal hazards and rescue procedures. The boy moved easily between practical concerns and supernatural conversations, treating both as natural parts of lighthouse life. His presence had helped Jonas maintain connection to innocence and hope, while processing profound grief and responsibility. The unconventional family structure they had created proved more resilient and nurturing than many traditional households, demonstrating that love could flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. Penelope's role as Jonas's assistant had evolved into full partnership in both the lighthouse operations and the rescue training program. Her musical therapy techniques were being studied by medical professionals interested in alternative approaches to trauma recovery, while her practical management skills kept the complex operation running smoothly. She had learned to see Jonas's condition not as madness to be cured but as a unique form of wisdom to be channeled constructively. Their marriage, begun as desperate practicality, had grown into genuine love based on mutual respect for each other's strengths and understanding of each other's wounds. The lighthouse had become a sanctuary where unconventional healing could flourish without judgment or limitation. 10 years after Penelope's arrival at the lighthouse, the Rescue Training Center had prevented over 200 documented maritime disasters, its influence spreading throughout the coastal shipping industry. Jonas, now recognized as one of New England's foremost experts on maritime safety, continued to consult with his invisible companions while teaching living sailors the hard-won lessons of past tragedies. His condition remained unchanged but had been recontextualized from liability to asset, his unique perspective providing insights that conventional minds couldn't access. The lighthouse community had learned to accommodate and value different forms of wisdom, recognizing that healing sometimes meant integration rather than elimination of traumatic responses. Oliver, preparing to leave for art school in Boston, had created a final portrait series documenting the lighthouse's supernatural inhabitants, not as symptoms of madness but as honored residents of a place where the boundary between life and death remained permeable. His artistic vision, shaped by years of bridging visible and invisible worlds, would influence a generation of painters and illustrators interested in spiritual themes. Penelope watched him pack his supplies with pride and sadness, knowing that their unusual family had given him perspectives on love, loss, and acceptance that would serve him throughout his life. The lighthouse had taught all of them that conventional definitions of family, sanity, and success were far too narrow to contain the complexity of human experience. As another autumn storm approached the Maine coast, Penelope climbed to the light room where Jonas maintained his eternal vigil, his conversations with the dead sailors now accompanied by reports from living mariners grateful for his guidance. The beacon's rhythm continued unchanged, but its meaning had evolved from simple warning to complex communication. A lighthouse that served not just physical navigation but spiritual healing. She understood now that some forms of love required accepting rather than changing those we care about, and that healing could take forms that conventional wisdom couldn't recognize or approve. Their story had proved that patient dedication, creative understanding, and willingness to see beyond surface appearances could transform even the most desperate circumstances into sources of strength and service. the lighthouse stood as testament to the power of love that honors the past while protecting the future.